It's been a little long. It's been a joy to get to go through these I am statements through the book of John. So for those of you who've been following along, we've been going through these statements that Jesus makes throughout the book of John about himself. And this is so crucially important because we need to know who Jesus is, right? We need to know who Jesus is. And I think that part of why this is so important, it's important for many reasons, but a big piece of this is that as we learn more about who Jesus is, it shows us more of who we are. It shows us who we are. And so first of all, on that note, for those of you who don't know, my name is John. David reminded me to introduce myself many times, and I forgot. My name is John, and it's just a joy to be with you all this morning. This particular passage in John chapter 15 that we're going to be looking at this morning, on this note of kind of identity and realizing who we are, I'm particularly excited because this is actually the only I am statement where Jesus specifically addresses this. Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches. He actually tells us who we are in this analogy that he makes. And none of the other I am statements does he do this. In John chapter 10, the good shepherd, Jesus, he certainly implies, right, that we are the sheep. I think that's the message that he's giving. But this is the only I am statement where he specifically tells us who we are in the analogy. So Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. He says, abide in me as I abide in you. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. And I would just encourage you, there is a lot here. There's a lot to look at here. So whether you are hearing this for the first time, whether you're kind of tracking along, going through the book of John, these I am statements for the first time, or you've heard this passage shared about 100 times, I would just encourage you to lean in and listen this morning because there is a lot to look at. I want to start with this idea that we are told to abide in the Lord. And the reason that I want to start here is because I believe that this is maybe a passage of Scripture that I think that I've misinterpreted for a lot of my life. And maybe I'm not alone in this. I think that maybe even subconsciously, I have attributed this idea of abide with this presence of sitting and resting and praying and reading my Bible. I think that I've attributed this idea of abide with kind of what we commonly refer to as like a quiet time, right? Of setting aside intentional time to be with the Lord. And I want you to hear me off the bat that is, of course, a good thing. That's, of course, an important thing. But in my mind, I think maybe even subconsciously, I have thought of this idea of setting aside intentional time, of praying, of reading the Word, of intimacy with Jesus. In my head, that was abiding. And here's the trouble with that, is that what that implies is that at some point, the sitting and the abiding, that has to end, right? That we have to get up from that we have to disconnect, and now we're no longer abiding, now we're going. And I think, broken down the Christian life into that idea that there's the abiding and then there's the going. There's the passive and then there's the active. Well, again, the trouble with that is that what that implies is that abiding ends. I think that through so much of my life, what had happened is I would sit and abide, and then I would go and I would leave God in that chair. I would leave God in that time of intimacy and abiding, and I would go and take off throughout my day. And in so doing, we can run into a lot of trouble. So I have been running quite a bit lately. It's something that I like to do. I've always been kind of something of a runner. Nothing too crazy, but I've always enjoyed running. And this past year, I've been running more than I usually do. And what I've been doing is adding more mileage to my running. So as I go out on a run, I'll go a little bit further this year than I really ever have before. And with that, I have very much felt the effects of what that does on my runs. As I've gone out and I've gone further and further and longer than I have before, kind of pushing myself beyond what I'm comfortable with doing, I have become very aware on these runs of the effect that that has. I've become more tired and more thirsty than I have before. So I've kind of noticed points where I've gotten out on these longer runs where I've gone maybe further than I ever have before. And I've gotten to the point where I become extremely aware of how thirsty I am, of how empty I am, even hungry on some of my runs, just feeling completely drained. And at some point, when you're going on kind of a longer run, at some point you're pretty far away from home, right, depending on what you're doing. So there's been a couple moments where I've become really aware of this, that I'm pretty far. I've got a pretty good amount of miles until I get back to where I'm supposed to be going and just feeling completely empty, completely drained. And so I told my wife about this after one of my runs. It didn't go quite as well as I wanted it to. I was thirsty and I was tired. And I made it back home, and I was telling my wife about that, and she, in her infinite wisdom, reminded me that I actually have a Camelback. And for those of you who are, maybe don't know what that is, it's like a little backpack, and people use it when they're hiking or when they're running, and you can fill it up with water, and you can carry it with you. So you can put it on your back, and you can fill it up with water, and you can carry it with you as you go. And so as you go, as you get thirsty, as you're feeling empty, as you're feeling drained, you can sip from it. And that dry mouth feeling that I'm actually experiencing right now, that tiredness, that thirstiness that you start to feel, you can bring that with you and carry it with you. That you don't have to just kind of prepare and get yourself ready for the run. And then I realized that so often what I would do is I would just take off, and at some point even kind of cross my fingers, and I was just out there and kind of seeing how far I could go. Or at some point when I'm many miles away from home, just kind of crossing my fingers and hope I don't pass out in someone's driveway on my way back home when I'm just feeling tired and drained. And I realized, actually, while I was on one of these runs, I realized that this is what I would so often do, even in my own life. That what I would so often do is I would sit and I would read and I would pray and I would try to fill myself up on that encouragement, that connection, that abiding in the Lord, and then I would just take off into my day. And I think that we often do this. We try to kind of go off of what we've filled ourselves with, and maybe that's from our time this morning. Maybe this time here, what that looks like for you, maybe that's last Sunday when you were in church, that time when you were filling yourself with the Lord. And I think that what we often do is we take off into our day, and we just kind of cross our fingers and see how far we can get. And we hope that we can just keep going until we just get completely depleted and have to go back to that time of abiding. Well, you see, the biggest problem with this kind of false reality that I'm presenting here is that it goes against the very definition of the word abide. So this word abide from the scriptures that Dane read for us this morning, this comes from a Greek word which means to await, to remain, to lodge, to dwell, to continue, and to endure. You see, abiding is constant. Abiding, by its very definition, by its very nature, is continuous. See, we have this ability to carry God with us, or maybe more aptly, He carries us. Again, I want to make sure that I'm completely clear here that I am not selling short or talking against this idea of sitting and being in intimacy with the Lord, because this is abiding. This kind of picture that I'm trying to paint here of sitting and praying, whether it's a quiet time in the morning or in the evening or filling yourself up with like-minded believers, whatever that looks like. I'm not speaking against that at all. In fact, how often in the scriptures, particularly in the book of John, if you look back through, he mentions often that Jesus goes off by himself to solitary and secluded places, often early in the morning. Constantly throughout the scriptures, we see Jesus doing that. And so I want you to hear that this is abiding. That this is abiding and being with the Lord. But the most important thing and what Jesus modeled for us is that abiding does not end here. Again, I think what I had kind of wired in my mind is that there's this idea of this connection and this abiding, but then at some point we have to disconnect and we have to go. But Jesus modeled for us throughout the scripture of he himself being a man, of going and being with his Father, of praying and abiding and being with his presence, and then going throughout the day walking in that Spirit. And Jesus was led by the Spirit in the things that he did, in the things that he said, the people that he encountered. Abiding, by its very definition, is constant. Jesus tells us in John chapter 15, abide in me as I abide in you. And then he warns us very clearly, apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. That's pretty clear. It's about as clear as it gets of what Jesus is warning us of the effects of not abiding, right? If we are living a life apart or disconnected from him. Apart from him, we can do nothing. So why do we try to bear fruit on our own? So that's the analogy, that's the picture that Jesus is getting at, and as he gets more into, which I'll touch on here at the end, this idea of him being the vine and us being the branches, this idea that we are to bear fruit. Why do we try to often do that on our own? I think that there may be a number of reasons, and I think sin, of course, is the root issue here. But can I suggest that pride might be a big piece of this, of why we are so quick to kind of disconnect and try to bear fruit on our own. I think that we are used to learning and then doing. That's kind of just like what we're wired to do from a very young age. That's kind of what we're taught to do. And I think that's something we can even kind of pride ourselves on our teachability, or our adaptability, our ability to kind of see something, to learn how to do it, and then, okay, yeah, I think I got that figured out. I've seen you do it once or twice. Now I can do it. Now I can go do it on my own. And I think that we are prone to do this. If we're not careful, I think that we do this often, even in our Christian life. This idea that during this time, maybe we're just trying to sit and we're trying to learn from God. And then we think to ourselves, okay, I've heard your teaching. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I think I've got it. I think I've learned it. So now I think I can go do it. You stay right there, God. You stay in that chair. I think I know what I'm doing. I think that we're quick to try to learn and then do. But what we're doing when we do this is we are putting God in the box of just being a good teacher. And this is not too uncommon, right? We see this even in the scriptures of while Jesus was here on earth. This was something that people often thought of him. Kind of this idea, they were trying to figure out who he was and what he was doing. And it was almost like, well, if nothing else, he's a good teacher. I've heard him teach. I've heard the things he said. He's a pretty good teacher. Even the disciples recognizing that he was a rabbi. But when we do that, we put God in the box of just being a good teacher. And if we try to take his teachings and the things that he's telling us to do, and then just go try as hard as we can in our own selves to do them, then we are missing who Jesus truly is. We are missing what Jesus truly wants to be in our lives. And Jesus recognized this even at this time. So in John chapter 14, which is just one chapter before this is in the same breath that he tells his disciples. This is all happening at the same time in the same conversation. In John chapter 14, Jesus recognized our need for a constant helper. And so this is where Jesus promises his disciples the Holy Spirit. This is from John chapter 14, starting in verse 15. It says, "If you love me, you will obey what I command. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor," or some translations, helper, "to be with you forever. The Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. So again, this is Jesus preparing his disciples for when he is going to leave the earth, and he's promising them the Holy Spirit, which will come and be a constant helper and a constant counselor for them. Now this idea where Jesus says twice in these verses, he says that he will be with you. So it's translated in this text, be with you, but that actually comes from that same Greek word that I mentioned earlier. It's the same word that Jesus then uses in John chapter 15 for abide or remain. It comes from that same root word, the idea that Jesus has sent himself in the form of the Holy Spirit to constantly abide and remain in us. He was already seeing the disciples' kind of their natural tendencies to just try to remember all the things that he taught them while he was on earth, and then just try to live out of those teachings. Just like we may often come here on Sunday mornings or do our own studying and reading, try to learn from his teaching and just try to memorize it and kind of eat up the teaching that he gives us, and then go and try to live out of that. Jesus reminds us that he has a helper that he wants to abide in us. It's not about being taught and then trying to do on our own. We are to constantly abide with Jesus in and through our day. And this is why Jesus reminds us later then in John chapter 15 that I am the vine, you are the branches. Because a branch, as I mentioned earlier, cannot in and of itself bear fruit. A branch cannot be taught to bear fruit. A branch that's sitting on the ground, it's never going to bear or produce fruit on its own, no matter how hard it tries. The theologian Matthew Henry has a quote sharing about these verses, and it goes like this. It says, "It is here intimated," talking about these verses here in John chapter 15, "that there are many who pass for branches in Christ who yet do not bear fruit. Were they really united to Christ by faith, they would bear fruit. But being only tied to him by the thread of outward profession, though they seem to be branches, they will soon be seen to be dry ones." So I think what Matthew Henry is saying here is that it is possible, it may even be often, that we try to tether ourselves to the vine when it's convenient for us. When we want to look or be perceived a certain way, that we try to just tie ourselves onto the vine to kind of have that perception of being connected. But as it talks about in these verses here, and it's also laid out in Matthew chapter 7 as well as other parts throughout the New Testament, that we will be known by our fruit. That we will be known by our fruit. And I ask, when your sphere of influence, and what I mean by that is just the people that you come in contact with, your family, your coworkers, your children, your parents, when they look at your life, do they see that fruit? Do they see that fruit being born out of your life? And I think for some of us, we can find this to be pretty difficult. I can put myself in that category that there have been years of my life where I've kind of struggled and strained, and I've felt myself kind of trying to produce fruit on my own. I think that maybe all of us would say, well, yeah, I want to bear fruit, but it can be hard to kind of unlock or realize what that looks like. And so it's not this idea of being taught, of learning, and then going and doing on our own. It's not this idea of just making ourselves look like branches by just tethering ourselves to the vine. So what does it mean? As I mentioned back at the beginning, I think that this idea is so central to our identity, that realizing who we are, and Jesus reminding us who we are and also who he is so central in understanding this concept. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. I think there's two sides to this kind of identity piece, and they may be equally important. So there are two parts of this that I think that we need to realize and understand. The first one, number one, is I am a branch. I am just a branch. And this should help us out a little bit with that kind of issue of pride that I mentioned earlier, right? It's reminding of ourselves that I'm just a branch. I have no fruit-bearing properties in and of myself. I cannot train myself or learn how to bear fruit. But I want you to hear that this is not meant to be self-deprecating. This isn't meant to be kind of something, a put down or something that we kind of put on ourselves to make ourselves feel bad. But this reality that I am a branch is brought complete when we realize I am just a branch, but I am connected to the vine. I think that we need to realize both of those things about ourselves, and that is what Jesus is telling us and reminding us in this passage. I am just a branch, but I am connected to the vine. We have the ability to be connected to our Savior all throughout our day. I think that this truth, that this reality should give us an incredible amount of freedom and confidence. Again, it's not meant to be self-deprecating. It's not meant for us to put ourselves down, but it's actually meant to do just the opposite and to help us live a life walking in Christ and bearing fruit the way that we are meant to do. As I mentioned earlier, Jesus modeled this for us during his time on earth. Living a life as a human, being connected to the Father, hearing from him, learning from him, but then also going and being led by the Spirit. My wife, who I mentioned earlier, we have a little daughter, but she is also pregnant with our second, which we recently found out is going to be a little boy. Thank you. We're pretty excited. So we, as we found that out a little while ago, there was this kind of moment when we found out that we were having a boy that I kind of became very aware of my own humanity, of my own kind of branchness, if you will. You see, I started to think about this idea of raising a boy, and I want you to hear that the reason that I kind of feel a little elevated sense of pressure maybe, or just this weight of what it looks like to raise this young boy up to be a man is for no other reason than just because I think I know too much, right? So obviously there was this idea of kind of this weight and this pressure with my daughter and just wanting to raise her right and just wanting to train her in the Lord. But now finding out that we're having a boy, again, I think no different rearing or no different struggles, but it's just the idea that I think I just know too much, right? Of being a young man myself and growing up and just kind of seeing what that looks like and experiencing the pitfalls. There's just this kind of elevated, in my mind, this elevated like weight and pressure of, man, I've got to raise this young boy to be a man that loves the Lord. And again, I think that I just, in finding out that we were having a boy, became very aware of my own humanity, of my own shortcomings. And I was reminded of something just recently. I wanted to share it with you all this morning. So Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, he actually writes this in several of his letters, but specifically in 1 Corinthians, in the first verse of chapter 11, Paul tells us, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Paul is telling the people of Corinth, I want you to look like me. I want you to do the things that I do. And now we need to hear that this is not communicated, this is not said in any form of arrogance, the way that it can kind of sometimes be construed, right? Paul's saying, like, I want you people to look like me and do what I do. This is not said in any form of arrogance, but rather in full confidence in the one in whom Paul is imitating. This statement is actually said not in arrogance, but in full confidence in the one in whom Paul is connected to. Paul can tell these people, I want you to look like me because I am confident that I am connected to the vine. So I should be confident to look at my son or my daughter, my friends, my coworkers, whoever's in that sphere of influence that I mentioned earlier. And if I am truly connected to the vine, I should be confident to say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Again, not in any form of myself, not because of me, because I'm just a branch, but because I look like the vine. Paul goes on in his second letter to the Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians 3:5, he writes, "Not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God." So what does this look like? When your sphere of influence, whoever that may be, maybe it's your children, your friends, co-workers, whatever that may be, when they look at your life, do they see your fruit or merely an outward profession? You know, when you are going for a run, you want to stretch beforehand, right? You want to prepare yourself. You want to make sure you've drank enough water that day. You want to make sure that you were prepared, that you have spent the time. Again, I can't overstate how vitally important it is, that time, that set-aside intimacy with Jesus. You want to make sure that you are prepared for your day. But I think that we need to be reminded this morning that we carry Christ with us. That as we go throughout our day, that we don't have to disconnect and leave God in that chair, that we can go throughout our day carrying Christ with us, sipping from his goodness and his peace and his wisdom and his comfort all throughout our day. So that as you are going, as you get to that long hill in front of you, if you get to that point in your day when you get that phone call that you've been regretting, when you hear that news or get that diagnosis that you've been dreading, when you get to that point in your day, maybe when you're pushed to your absolute limits, when you're feeling yourself feeling drained and empty, pushed to your absolute limits, we need to be reminded that like a backpack on our back, we carry Christ with us. That in those moments, we can drink of his goodness and his peace and his faithfulness that he gives us all throughout our day. The worship team can go ahead and come back up as I finish my thoughts here. One idea of what this has started to look like for me is I've started praying throughout my day, just a simple prayer of, Lord, thank you that you hear me. It actually comes from a couple chapters earlier in John. David preached about it 2 weeks ago when Jesus is at Lazarus' tomb. And he prays, Lord, I thank you that you hear me. We need to be reminded throughout the day that we carry Christ with us. So we can have the confidence to look at our sphere of influence, whoever that may be, and say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Not because of our own selves, because I'm just a branch, but I'm connected to the vine.